I died. One moment I was breathing, the next, nothing, just blackness, and just like that I was gone. But death wasn't the end, it was just the beginning, because the moment I crossed over, I saw something I could never have imagined. Gene Hackman, standing there, silent, lost, trapped in a place between life and eternity. I always thought death would bring answers. Instead, it came with a question, one that shook me to my core. Was it already too late? Let me back up. My name is Nora Hill. I was an average woman, living an average life, or so I thought. I wasn't deeply religious, but I wasn't an atheist either. I fell somewhere in between, floating through life with an uneasy indifference about God, heaven, or anything beyond what I could see. I believed in being a good person, though I wasn't perfect. Who is? I had a decent job in real estate, a small apartment in Los Angeles, and enough problems to keep my mind busy. Bills, relationships, trying to figure out my purpose, just like everyone else. My routine was simple. Wake up, drink coffee, answer emails, go to work, come home, scroll through my phone until I fell asleep. Every day the same thing. But on that particular day, something felt different. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was a normal Thursday afternoon when it happened. I had just finished showing a house to a couple when a sharp, searing pain shot through my chest. It was unlike anything I had ever felt, like my heart was being crushed by an invisible force. I stumbled, gripping the doorframe, gasping for air. Then everything around me slowed. The voices of the couple became distant echoes. The room seemed to stretch and blur. My vision darkened at the edges, and I collapsed to the floor. I heard someone shouting my name. Footsteps, the pounding of my heart. Or was it stopping? I wasn't sure anymore. Then silence. A deep, endless silence. I was dead. The next thing I knew, I was hovering above the scene. I could see myself lying on the floor, eyes half open, lifeless. The woman who had been touring the house was screaming. The man was on the phone, dialing 911. I should have been terrified, but I wasn't. I felt detached, like I was watching a movie, except I was the main character. I tried to speak, to move, to get back into my body, but nothing worked. I wasn't in control anymore. That's when I noticed something strange. A presence. It started as a whisper, a shift in the air. Then it grew stronger. It wasn't a sound or a sight, but a knowing, a deep, undeniable awareness that I was not alone. A light appeared in the distance. It was unlike any light I had ever seen. Alive, pulsing, beckoning me forward. I felt an invisible force pulling me toward it, away from the world I had always known. I was crossing over. For a moment I was surrounded by darkness. It wasn't empty. It was heavy, pressing against me like an unseen weight. I heard whispers, low and distant, speaking in a language I didn't understand. The air was thick, suffocating. Panic surged through me. Was I in hell? Had I been judged already? Then, just as suddenly as the darkness had come, the light returned, brighter, stronger, and filled with a warmth that pushed away the fear gripping my soul. That's when I saw him. A figure stepped out of the light. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I knew who it was. Every part of me recognized him, even though I had never met him before. It was Jesus. There was no mistaking it. The light surrounding him was unlike anything I had ever seen, so pure, so alive that it made everything else seem dull in comparison. It wasn't just shining, it was breathing, pulsating with an energy I could feel deep within my being. I should have been afraid, overwhelmed, or even unworthy, but the moment I looked at him, all I felt was peace. A peace so deep it stripped away every fear, every doubt, and every question I ever had about my existence. Yet, at the same time, I was completely exposed. It was as if he could see every moment of my life, all the good, the bad, and the things I had buried deep inside, hoping no one would ever find out. And still, there was no condemnation in his eyes, only truth. Truth so powerful it made my soul tremble. I opened my mouth to speak, but I didn't need to. The question formed in my mind, and instantly he answered. "You have been given a glimpse of the beyond," Jesus said. His voice wasn't just sound, it was felt, resonating inside me. "There is something you must see, something you must know." I wanted to ask what he meant, but before I could, everything around us shifted. The light faded, and suddenly we were standing in a completely different place. It wasn't heaven, it wasn't hell, it was somewhere in between. The landscape before me stretched endlessly, a vast empty place filled with a thick grey mist that moved as if it were alive. There were no buildings, no sun, no sky, just an eerie stillness that made my skin crawl. Then I saw them. Silhouettes of people, hundreds, no thousands, walking in the distance, wandering aimlessly. They moved like shadows, lost in some kind of trance. Their faces were blurred, their bodies weightless, as if they weren't fully there. I turned to Jesus, confusion knotting in my chest. "Who are they?" I asked. His expression was solemn. "These are the souls who lived their lives believing they had time to seek me later. They never outright rejected me, but they never truly followed me either. They lived in the grey, refusing to choose." I felt a pang of guilt deep in my chest. That was me. I had always put off the deeper questions, telling myself I'd figure it out someday. "And now," I asked, "what happens to them?" "They wait," Jesus said, "until the day comes when all shall be revealed." A chill ran down my spine. Then, out of nowhere, Jesus spoke a name I never expected to hear. "Gene Hackman." I blinked. "The actor?" Jesus didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at me with an intensity that made my knees weak. "What you think you know is not always the truth. There are things hidden from the world, things that, when revealed, will shake the foundation of what people believe." My mind raced. Why was Gene Hackman's name being mentioned here? What did he have to do with any of this? I stood frozen, my thoughts tangled in confusion. Gene Hackman. Of all the things I expected to hear in the afterlife, his name wasn't one of them. I had grown up watching his movies, The French Connection, Superman, Unforgiven. He was a Hollywood legend, a household name, a man whose face and voice had been cemented in cinema history. But why was Jesus mentioning him here, in this place beyond life? I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. "What about Gene Hackman?" I finally asked. Jesus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at me with those piercing eyes, eyes that saw into the deepest parts of me, past the masks I had worn in life, past the excuses I had made. His gaze was not harsh, but it was absolute. There was no room for lies or misunderstanding. "Come," he said. And with that single word, the world around me shifted again. I felt a pull, as if my soul was being drawn through time itself. The mist that had once surrounded us vanished, replaced by a completely different scene. We were standing in a dimly lit room. An old wooden desk sat in the corner, cluttered with books and papers. The faint hum of a television played in the background, though I couldn't make out what was on the screen. At the center of the room sat a man. He was older, with silver hair and deep lines etched into his face. He sat hunched over a stack of papers, his fingers tracing words he had written down, as if lost in thought. Though I had never met him in person, I recognized him instantly. It was Gene Hackman. I watched, barely breathing, as he sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. He looked tired, no, more than tired, burdened, as if the weight of something unseen pressed heavily on his shoulders. Then he spoke. "God, are you there?" The words were whispered, barely audible, but they sent chills down my spine. Jesus gestured toward the scene before us. Few know the depth of his struggles. He was a man the world thought they understood, but only I knew the war inside his heart. I swallowed, my throat tight. What war? Jesus didn't answer with words. Instead, I felt it. A rush of emotions hit me like a tidal wave. Pain, regret, longing. It wasn't my own, but his, Gene Hackman's. I saw flashes of his life, not as the world saw him, but as he truly was behind closed doors. I saw a boy, young and eager, growing up in a broken home, desperate for direction. I saw a man rising through Hollywood, chasing fame, yet never truly feeling fulfilled. I saw moments where he had questioned everything, where the bright lights of his career couldn't silence the deeper questions gnawing at his soul. "Does any of this matter?" he had once whispered to himself in the quiet of his room. "Is this all there is?" But no one had ever heard him ask those questions, because the world only saw the actor. Jesus turned to me. Many souls walk through life believing they have time to find the truth. But the enemy works in distractions, in illusions of success and purpose. Gene's greatest struggle was not in his career, but in his heart. I felt my breath hitch. Did he find the truth? Jesus didn't answer right away. He simply extended his hand, and suddenly the scene changed again. We were now standing in a church, small, dimly lit, with wooden pews stretching toward an altar at the front. Gene was there. He sat alone in the back, his hands clasped together, his head bowed. He wasn't dressed for a public appearance. No expensive suits, no Hollywood polish. Just a man, stripped of everything, searching for something greater than himself. I watched as he sighed deeply, shaking his head. "I don't know how to do this," he whispered. "I've spent my whole life pretending to be other people. I don't even know who I am anymore." The weight of his words hit me like a hammer. How many times had I felt the same? How many times had I played a role in my own life, trying to be who the world expected me to be, instead of searching for who I was meant to be? "And what did he do?" I asked Jesus, my voice unsteady. Jesus looked at me with a sorrowful expression. "He made a choice, as all must. Some choices lead to life. Others lead to an endless search that never finds completion." A cold realization settled in my chest. Some people walk to the light, others walk away. "Where did he walk?" I asked, though I wasn't sure if I wanted the answer. Jesus didn't respond. Instead, he lifted his hand again, and the world around us changed once more. I saw Gene Hackman as an old man, sitting in his home, staring out the window. The television was on, but he wasn't watching it. His hands rested on his lap, his fingers tapping rhythmically, as if lost in thought. He looked empty. Not in the way of someone who had lived a meaningless life, but in the way of someone who had missed something vital, something he had spent his whole life searching for but had never fully grasped. "He was given the truth," Jesus said softly, but he, like many, struggled to surrender to it. A deep sadness filled me. It wasn't a sadness for Gene Hackman, the actor. It was a sadness for Gene Hackman, the man. A man who had everything the world could offer, yet still felt the void. I turned to Jesus. Is he here?" Jesus' expression remained unreadable. "That is not for you to know. What matters is that you understand the lesson." I felt a lump in my throat. "And what is the lesson?" Jesus looked deep into my eyes, and in that moment, I felt as though he was speaking to everyone, not just to me, but to the millions who would one day hear this testimony. You do not have to wait until the end to seek me. You do not have to live a life of almost belief. You do not have to carry the weight alone. A powerful wave of emotion surged through me. I had spent my whole life like Gene, pushing aside the deeper questions, pretending I had more time, but time was never guaranteed. I turned to Jesus, my heart pounding. Why did you show me this? His answer was simple, because there are many like him and many like you. The weight of his words crushed me. This wasn't just about Gene Hackman. This was about all of us. I felt myself trembling. What happens now? I asked. Jesus looked at me, his expression filled with both love and urgency. Now you return. My stomach dropped. Return? To where? Jesus didn't answer with words. Instead, he simply reached out, touched my forehead, and in an instant, everything went black. The darkness swallowed me whole. There was no sound, no feeling, nothing to anchor me. It was as if I had ceased to exist, floating in an abyss beyond time and space. I wanted to speak, to cry out, but I had no voice, no body, no form. Just an overwhelming sense that something massive was happening. Then, in a single breath, everything ripped open. Light. A rushing force yanked me forward, as though I were being pulled through the very fabric of reality. It wasn't painful, but it was powerful. My entire being vibrated as if caught in a current of energy far greater than anything I had ever known. And suddenly, I could feel myself again, my hands, my feet, my chest rising and falling with breath. I was somewhere new, somewhere else. That's when I realized I was back in my body. The first thing I noticed was the pain. A deep, aching pressure spread across my chest, as if a great weight had been sitting on me. My lungs burned as they struggled to pull in air, and every inch of my skin tingled with the sensation of life returning. I gasped, eyes snapping open. Blinding fluorescent lights flickered above me. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled my nostrils. Muffled voices buzzed somewhere nearby, urgent and sharp. I wasn't in heaven. I was in a hospital. A loud beeping sound pierced the air, a heart monitor, its steady rhythm confirming the impossible. I had died, and now I was back. The voices grew clearer, footsteps rushed toward me. "She's awake!" someone shouted. A blur of movement as doctors and nurses surrounded my bed, their faces a mixture of shock and relief. "Take it easy," one of them said, pressing me back against the pillows. "You've been through a lot." I wanted to speak, to tell them everything, but my throat was raw, my body too weak to move. My mind spun, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I had been there. I had stood before Jesus. I had seen things beyond human understanding. And now I was back in this world, expected to just go on as if nothing had happened. No, I thought. I can't just forget this. I can't keep this to myself. But how could I explain what I had seen? How could I put into words the weight of what I had just experienced? The doctor checked my vitals, his brow furrowed in disbelief. "Your heart stopped for nearly 5 minutes. We were sure we'd lost you." 5 minutes. To them, it was 5 minutes. To me, it had felt like eternity. I tried to sit up, my body weak and unsteady. "I need to tell you something," I croaked, my voice barely a whisper. The doctor leaned in. "What is it?" I swallowed hard, my heart pounding. I was dead." A brief silence filled the room. A shift in energy, subtle but noticeable. The doctor exchanged glances with the nurse beside him. "You went into cardiac arrest," he said carefully, "but we managed to resuscitate you." I shook my head weakly. "No, you don't understand. I saw something. I was somewhere else. I stood before Jesus." Another pause. The doctor cleared his throat. "It's not uncommon for people to experience hallucinations during cardiac events. Your brain..." "It wasn't a hallucination," I interrupted, my voice stronger now. It was real. I looked him straight in the eye, willing him to see the truth in my words. I saw Jesus. He showed me things. He told me things. A flicker of uncertainty passed across the doctor's face, but he quickly masked it with professional detachment. Your body has been through a major trauma, he said, his tone clinical. It's best if you rest. We can talk more later. I wanted to argue, to make them listen, but exhaustion pulled me under. My eyelids grew heavy, and despite my best efforts to fight it, I slipped into unconsciousness. When I woke again, the room was quieter. The beeping of the heart monitor was steady. A dim glow from the window signaled that evening had fallen. For a moment, I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, letting the reality of what had happened settle over me like a crushing weight. I had died. I had seen the truth. And now, I was back. But why? Why had Jesus sent me back when so many others never returned? My mind raced with everything I had seen. Gene Hackman's name, the wandering souls, the choice he had faced. It wasn't just about him. It was about all of us. So many people were lost in the illusion of time, believing they had forever to make a decision. But forever was a lie. You do not have to wait until the end to seek me. Jesus' words echoed in my mind, pressing against my heart. I couldn't ignore this. I wouldn't ignore this. I had been sent back for a reason, and no matter the cost, I would make sure the world knew what I had seen. The door creaked open, pulling me from my thoughts. A nurse stepped inside, a kind smile on her face. You're awake. How are you feeling? I hesitated, then met her eyes. I need to tell someone what happened to me. Her expression shifted slightly, curious but cautious. Of course. Do you remember everything? I nodded. I remember everything. She pulled up a chair, settling in beside my bed. Okay, she said gently. I'm listening. I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts, and then I began to speak. I told her about the light, about standing before Jesus, about the souls wandering in the mist, lost in their indecision. And then I told her about Gene Hackman. Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't interrupt. When I finished, a long silence stretched between us. Finally, she spoke. You said you saw Gene Hackman. I nodded. Yes, Jesus showed me something about him, about his struggles, about his choice. Her brow furrowed. That's strange. I frowned. Why? She hesitated, then pulled out her phone, tapping at the screen. After a few seconds, she turned it toward me. I felt the blood drain from my face. Because there, staring back at me from the screen, was a headline. Hollywood icon Gene Hackman passes away at 94. My pulse roared in my ears. He was gone. He had passed while I was on the other side. And somehow, in a way I still couldn't fully comprehend, Jesus had shown him to me. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. This was real. This was so real. And now I had no choice but to tell the world. I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. Gene Hackman was dead. The date, the time, it lined up too perfectly. He had passed while I was on the other side, while I stood before Jesus, while I saw him, lost in the mist, facing the choice that determined his eternity. The weight of it pressed down on my chest like a stone. This wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. My hands trembled as I reached for the phone, my fingers hovering just above the screen. Gene Hackman was gone. But where was he now? Had he made the right choice in those final moments? Had he called out to Jesus, or had he remained in that wandering state, trapped between decision and regret? I felt a sickening twist in my gut. The nurse, her name tag read Lisa, watched me closely. I could tell she was trying to gauge my reaction, trying to decide whether to entertain my claims or dismiss me as a delirious patient rambling after a near-death experience. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. I forced myself to nod. "Yeah, I don't know what to do with this." She hesitated, then shifted slightly in her chair. "Do you believe that what you saw was real?" I met her gaze. "It was more real than anything I've ever experienced in my life." Lisa nodded slowly, as if she were considering something. "I've heard of cases like this before," she admitted. "Patients who come back after being clinically dead. Some of them see things, light, loved ones, even Jesus. But this is different." She gestured toward the phone. "You saw him while you were gone, and now he's dead. That's unsettling." Unsettling. That was an understatement. It was terrifying. It was earth-shattering. And it demanded an answer. "I have to tell someone," I said suddenly. "People need to know what I saw. This isn't just about me. It's bigger than that." Lisa gave me a wary look. "I believe you saw something. But if you start telling people that Jesus showed you Gene Hackman on the other side, they might think you've lost it." "I don't care." My voice came out stronger than I expected. "This isn't just some dream or hallucination. It was real. And if it was real, that means people need to wake up." Lisa looked conflicted. I could see the logical part of her brain fighting against the possibility that something supernatural had actually happened. "Okay," she said finally. "Who do you want to tell?" I opened my mouth to answer, and then I hesitated, because the truth was, I didn't know who to tell. Would the doctors listen? Number, they'd dismiss it as a hallucination. My family, friends, they'd probably think I had suffered brain damage. I needed to find the right people, people who would understand the gravity of what I had seen. And then it hit me. The media. The moment the thought entered my mind, I pushed it aside. Number. That was ridiculous. The media wouldn't take me seriously. They'd twist my story, mock me, turn it into a joke. But still, Gene Hackman's death was already making headlines. If I could find a way to connect my experience to the timing of his passing, would people start asking questions? Would they start seeking truth? I clenched my jaw. I had to at least try. But even as I made my decision, doubt crept into my mind like a slow-moving poison. What if I was crazy? What if I had imagined all of it? What if, in my dying moments, my brain had scrambled together images of my past, my knowledge of Gene Hackman and my own beliefs, creating some elaborate vision? I wanted to dismiss the doubt, but it gnawed at me. And then I remembered something. You do not have to wait until the end to seek me. Jesus had said those words to me, not just to me, but to everyone. I knew what I had seen. I had felt the presence of Christ, the weight of eternity, and no amount of doubt could erase that. I took a deep breath and looked at Lisa. "I need to get my story out, and I need your help." Lisa hesitated but eventually sighed. "All right. I know a journalist. She covers unusual stories sometimes, religious experiences, unexplained phenomena. I can try to reach out to her." "Please," I said. Lisa nodded, pulling out her phone. "I'll text her, but don't get your hopes up. Even if she believes you, convincing the world is another thing entirely." I understood that, but I also knew this wasn't about getting the world to believe me. It was about making them listen. As Lisa typed, I glanced at the window. The sky outside was dark, but I felt something inside me shift. A certainty, a knowing. This wasn't the end of my journey. It was only the beginning. Lisa's fingers moved swiftly over her phone screen as she typed out a message to the journalist. The only sound in the room was the faint beeping of the heart monitor beside me. I tried to steady my breathing, but my mind was racing. What if this journalist ignored me? What if no one took me seriously? But then another thought hit me. What if they did? What if this story spread? What if people truly listened? What if, somehow, this message reached those who needed to hear it? You do not have to wait until the end to seek me. Jesus' words echoed in my mind again. This wasn't about me. This was about eternity. Lisa set her phone down and glanced at me. She saw my message. She's curious but skeptical. She wants to know if you're willing to meet her. I exhaled. Yes, absolutely. Lisa hesitated. Are you sure? The media can be brutal. If this gets out the wrong way, it could ruin your reputation. People might mock you, call you crazy. I don't care, I cut in. I saw what I saw. I need to tell people. Even if only one person listens, it's worth it. Lisa studied me for a long moment, then nodded. All right, she said. I'll set up the meeting. The next afternoon, Lisa wheeled me into a small private conference room in the hospital. My body was still weak, but my mind was sharper than ever. Sitting across from me was a woman in her late 30s, dressed in a dark blazer. Her expression was unreadable, her eyes sharp and analytical. She had the look of someone who had seen and heard everything, a journalist who wasn't easily convinced. She introduced herself as Rebecca Marsh, a writer for an independent online news outlet. I've covered a lot of near-death experiences before, she said, tapping a pen against her notepad. Most of them follow the same pattern: light, peace, sometimes seeing deceased relatives. Your case is different. You claim to have seen Gene Hackman, a well-known actor, while he was dying. That's a bold claim, and frankly, it sounds unlikely. I met her gaze. I know how it sounds. She leaned back. Then let's start from the beginning. Tell me everything. I took a deep breath. And then I told her. I told her about my heart stopping, the moment of darkness, and the overwhelming presence of Christ. I described the mist, the wandering souls, and Gene Hackman standing there, lost, uncertain, on the edge of eternity. Rebecca listened without interrupting, though I could see the skepticism in her eyes. When I finished, she sighed, tapping her pen on the table again. And you're absolutely sure it was Gene Hackman? Positive. She studied me for a moment. And you believe Jesus showed you this for a reason? Yes. Silence stretched between us. Then Rebecca opened her bag and pulled out a printed article. She slid it across the table. It was an obituary for Gene Hackman. I'd already seen the news on Lisa's phone, but seeing it printed in black and white made it feel even more real. Rebecca tapped her finger on a line near the bottom of the page. Sources close to the actor say that in his final weeks, Hackman had become increasingly withdrawn, speaking often about mortality and faith. One friend reported that he had been wrestling with something, but never elaborated. I felt my stomach drop. This was real. Rebecca leaned forward. If what you're saying is true, then maybe he really was struggling with that choice. Maybe in those final moments, he was facing what you saw. But there's no way to prove that. I swallowed hard. I know, but proof isn't the point. The message is quotation mark. She narrowed her eyes. Which is that eternity is real, that we don't have forever to make our decision, that anyone, even the most famous, the most accomplished, can stand on the edge of eternity and still be lost. Rebecca didn't speak for a long time. Then she exhaled and closed her notepad. I'll write about it, she said finally, but I can't promise people will believe you. They don't have to, I said. They just need to hear it. Rebecca's article was published. The headline was cautious but gripping. Man claims near-death experience gave him a vision of Gene Hackman in the afterlife. A warning or a delusion? The story spread faster than I expected. Social media picked it up. Some people mocked it, calling me crazy. Others were intrigued. Religious groups debated it. A few pastors reached out to me privately, saying they wanted to hear more. But the most surprising response came in the form of an email. It was from someone who claimed to have known Gene Hackman personally. They wrote, "I don't know what to make of your story, but I will tell you this. Gene had been asking a lot of questions about Jesus before he died. He never talked about religion much before, but something changed in his last days. He was searching for something. Your story, it's unsettling, because it makes me wonder if he really was facing that choice in the end." I read the email over and over, my hands shaking. This was bigger than me, bigger than Gene Hackman. This was about all of us. And now, there was no turning back. The email stayed on my screen for a long time. I read it over and over, my heart pounding with something I couldn't quite name. Validation, fear, a sense of purpose so overwhelming that I could barely breathe. Gene had been asking a lot of questions about Jesus before he died. That one sentence haunted me. It was a confirmation, wasn't it? A sign that what I had seen was real, that Gene Hackman really had been in that in-between space, teetering on the edge of eternity. Had he made his choice in time? Had he called on Jesus in his final moments? Or had he hesitated too long? I would never know the answer. But that wasn't my job. My job was to speak, to warn. And as soon as Rebecca's article went viral, I realized just how hard that would be. The responses came in waves. Some people reached out in private, thanking me, sharing their own near-death experiences, saying they had always suspected that something was waiting on the other side. But others tore me apart. Another religious nut looking for attention. This guy's just using Gene Hackman's death to get famous. Total scam. He probably heard about Hackman dying while he was dead, and his brain made up a dream about it. I expected criticism. I welcomed skepticism. But I wasn't prepared for the sheer hatred that came my way. At first, it was just online comments. Then, the phone calls started. Someone leaked my hospital information, and suddenly I was getting calls from reporters, conspiracy theorists, and even angry people who accused me of slandering Gene Hackman's name. Had I made a mistake? Had I spoken too soon? Was I putting myself and others in danger? I thought about Jesus' words. "You do not have to wait until the end to seek me." I knew what I had seen, and I would not be silenced. The next day, Lisa came into my hospital room with an unreadable expression. "Someone's here to see you," she said. I frowned. "Who?" She hesitated. "A pastor. Says he read your story and needs to talk to you. His name is Pastor Jordan." I didn't recognize the name, but I nodded. "Send him in." A moment later, a man in his late 40s entered the room. He was tall, with graying hair and a serious expression. He shook my hand. "I'll get right to the point," he said. "Your story, it stirred something. Not just in me, but in others. And I need to know, are you willing to really stand behind this? Because if you are, you need to be prepared for what comes next." I swallowed. "What do you mean?" He pulled out a folder and set it on the tray table. "I did some digging. Turns out Gene Hackman did start asking about Jesus before he died. Quietly, privately, but it wasn't random." I frowned. "Then what was it?" Pastor Jordan leaned forward. Someone had been witnessing to him, someone close, a family friend. They had been urging him to reconsider his beliefs. They had been telling him about Jesus. A chill ran down my spine. And here's where it gets even more interesting, he continued. I made a few calls. One of my contacts in Hollywood told me that a few powerful people weren't happy about your story spreading. I blinked. Why would Hollywood care about what I saw? Pastor Jordan gave me a knowing look. Because the last thing they want is for people to start asking questions about eternity, about Jesus, about the truth. I let that sink in. This was bigger than I had realized, bigger than me. Pastor Jordan folded his hands. I don't think you went through this just for yourself. I think God is trying to wake people up. But you need to decide, are you willing to take this all the way? I didn't even have to think about it. Yes, I said, I am. His lips pressed into a thin line. Then you need to be prepared, because this isn't just a testimony anymore. This is truth. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in my hospital bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Gene Hackman had been at the edge of eternity, and now millions of people knew it. Some mocked, some hated, but some listened. I wasn't here to convince the world. I was here to plant a seed, and even if I never knew how many people it reached, how many hearts it changed, I had to keep going. Because eternity was real, and time was running out. I left the hospital 4 days later. My body was healing, but my soul was on fire. I couldn't stop thinking about it, about the moment I stood between life and death, about the wandering souls in the mist, about Gene Hackman on the edge of eternity, about Jesus. I knew what I had to do. I started small, speaking to anyone who would listen, friends, family, people at church. I told them everything, what I had seen, what I had heard, what I had felt. Some believed me immediately, others listened politely, nodded, and moved on with their lives. But some looked shaken, some whispered. I've always wondered if something like this was real. And those were the ones I knew I had reached. Then came the invitations. First a local church, then another, then a small Christian radio show. I started speaking wherever I could. I didn't try to sensationalize anything. I didn't exaggerate. I just told the truth. Eternity is real. You do not have forever to make your choice. Jesus is the only way. I spoke with urgency because I felt the urgency. I saw the distractions, the excuses, the lies that kept people from making a decision. I saw how the world tried to drown out the truth with noise, with pleasure, with skepticism. But I knew what was waiting on the other side. And I couldn't stay silent. The backlash never stopped. Some people said I was delusional. Others called me a fraud. A few reporters even tried to discredit me, claiming I had made everything up for attention. I didn't care, because for every critic there was someone who listened. And for every person who listened, there was someone whose heart was stirred. I started getting emails, messages, people asking questions, people who had been running from God, now wondering if it was time to stop. That was all the confirmation I needed. I knew I would spend the rest of my life telling this story, not because I wanted attention, not because I needed validation, but because I had seen the truth. And once you see the truth, you can't turn away. So I kept speaking. I kept warning. I kept telling people that eternity is real, that their choices matter, that time is running out. Some listened, some didn't. But I had done my part, and when my time finally comes, when I stand before Jesus again, this time for good, I want to hear him say the only words that matter. Well done, good and faithful servant. I have told you everything. I have shared what I saw, what I heard, and what I now know to be true. But now the choice is yours. Eternity is not a distant concept. It is not a myth or a fairy tale. It is real. And whether you believe it or not, one day you will step into it. I was given a second chance, not for myself, but to warn you. Please do not wait until it is too late. Jesus is real. Heaven is real. Hell is real. You do not have to be lost. You do not have to wait until the very end to seek him. He is calling you now. Will you answer?